Howdy, this is Jim Rutt, and this is The Jim Rutt Show. Listeners have asked us to provide pointers to some of the resources we talk about on the show. We now have links to books and articles referenced in recent podcasts that are available on our website. We also offer full transcripts. Go to jimruttshow.com. That's jimruttshow.com. Today's guest is Aravind Srinivas. He is the co-founder and CEO of Perplexity AI, an artificial intelligence startup that has developed an AI-powered search engine, or some people call it an answer engine. Aravind is a graduate of IIT, that very famous Indian technology college, which has produced an amazing number of good people, and he has a PhD in computer science from the University of California at Berkeley. Prior to co-founding Perplexity, Aravind worked as a research scientist at OpenAI, contributing to projects like the text-to-image generator DALL-E. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm actually super excited to have you here. I have to, confess to being quite a fanboy of Perplexity.
Thank you.
Regular listeners know I probably mention it once every 3 episodes at least. I use it every day. It's probably replaced 50 to 60% of my Googling and a significant amount of my use of ChatGPT and Claude as answer engines. And I keep expanding my usage, which is interesting, mostly taking share from my Google searches. Though I will say, for people who are sort of thinking about making the switch, different kind of answers, better in many ways, different in others. One minor trade-off against Google is speed. Google's faster. And so I've always find myself doing a optimization problem in my head when I think about which one to use, because I always have both open in my browser. If it's relatively simple and speed is better, then I'll go with Google. If it's something where you could easily spend time weeding through links, trying to figure out what's spam and what's not, then I go with Perplexity. And as the difficulty of the question increases, I'm much more likely to go with Perplexity. I still find Google better and faster. In fact, I tested it again this afternoon just to make sure that it was still the case that things like best Mexican restaurants in Lawrenceville, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Google was better in several ways. And one of the nice things, it had a map feature, which is quite a plus. On the other hand, for many, many things, Perplexity is definitely the answer. Anything that I think of as research-oriented. I'm going to give a few of the searches I've done in the last 3 days, which is kind of indicative of the kinds of things I use it for. These are by no means the only searches I've done. Hilariously, the last search I did on Perplexity is, what do you know about Aravind Srinivas, CEO of Perplexity? And it gave me the best answer that anybody had. So that was good.
Or even other things like, tell me about how the costs of AI have gone down in the past year, or, when is Hurricane Milton going to hit Florida and where, or compare the stock returns of Berkshire Hathaway and S&P 500 over the last 5 to 10 years. Or how many queries per year does Google serve, or how to download a particular piece of software, or how to fix this particular software install on my Mac store, or even what is the national game of India, or when is the vice presidential debate happening, or is there another presidential debate? These are just all the sort of questions that Google is never going to give you a proper answer for, but Perplexity would just nail it.
Yeah, I'm amazed that Google doesn't get what time's the debate tonight. They're just terrible. That's idiocy. They should be able to fix that.
Do you know why?
No.
It's because they're afraid of a mistake there. A mistake would cost them so much in terms of brand reputation, stock price. Whereas sure, a mistake costs Perplexity too, but it's more that we're very confident in our technology and we're okay with making mistakes if it helps us improve and get it right. We're very transparent in our communication to the users that we're still a startup figuring this thing out. Whereas for Google, they're the giant, they're the 800-pound gorilla, and they think okay, when Google rolls out something, it should always be top notch and accurate and reliable. And when they did a live demo of Google Bard earlier, they used to call it Gemini as Bard. Not a lot of people might remember. The live demo failed, and then Google stock went down by 5 to 7% in a single day. So that's basically the thing that we are taking advantage of, which is the asymmetry, the innovator dilemma of us getting 8 out of 10 queries right is impressing people like you, Jim. But Google getting 2 out of 10 queries wrong is making people feel like Google's losing, and like the stock price goes down, and like Wall Street panics and Google's no longer seen as a leader in AI. So that is like the opening for a new entrant like us.
Interesting. Yeah, that's always fun to be the fast maneuvering guy against the behemoth. I was able to do that a few times in my business career. Another thing that I really like about Perplexity versus Google, OpenAI, Gemini, any of them, is your Perplexity engine's not afraid to give an opinion. Let me give you 2 examples that I just tested this afternoon as I was doing my research. The first one I asked, which is the better band, the Beatles or the Doors? And OpenAI gave a very equivocal, yeah, on the left hand, on the right hand, blah, blah. Gemini, something very similar. Perplexity said, Beatles, and here's why. Boom, 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 boom. And I go, that's great. If I ask a specific question about which is better, I want an opinion. Here's another one. This is a little bit more controversial, probably. I asked Perplexity, is Donald Trump mentally ill? And it gave quite a long readout of opinions of people that thought he was. And then it, of course, warned at the end that, we can't really diagnose without an actual blah, blah. But it told pretty much what it thought. OpenAI, which I asked, just gave a completely bland non-answer, obviously deflecting the question. And I've seen that before. It wasn't the only time I've seen that, where Perplexity is not afraid to say what it thinks and doesn't feel like it has to wrap the answer in all this equivocation like the other engines do. Is that by design, or is that just an emergent result?
I mean, look, you're going to get qualitatively very different answers if you're designing a system to always go search the web, read what other people are saying, and then like arrive at a opinion based on that, versus just try to answer what the AI model builder engineered you to do, which is just a model, like AI model just generating its own opinions about like what you're asking. And because there are like several guardrails built into like the AI models, or like several different kinds of like, RLHF techniques of like what the human preferences are in your data set, different AI models will tend to like answer in like very different ways, and like sometimes give you non-answers because that's what they've been trained to do, versus like telling you, okay, like this part of the web thinks this is what it is, that part of the web thinks this is what it is. But you got to arrive at your own conclusions. So giving you like a diverse perspectives about things, like actual perspective rather than like verbiage that amounts to nothing, is possible because of the way we built the system using this technique called retrieval-augmented-generation, or RAG, where we pull results from the web, ingest that as a part of the prompt, and then ask the model to think, okay, using all this as additional context, not just like based on what you think on your own as an AI model, can you try to answer the user's question? And also like cite the sources, make sure that the user can even go and fact check what you're saying. So that gives this qualitatively different experience on Perplexity compared to like ChatGPT.
And I love the citations. I will say, more often than I like, the citations are to some kind of bland review article or something, but then you can go from there to the real source. It's very, very good to have those citations. And OpenAI does not yet have citations. And as you laid out why, it's going to be extremely difficult to get them directly out of a large language model. While using a RAG, of course, much simpler, because you know what the RAG pulled back, and you can go through those and sort those out and say, which of these do I want to present as the source? So I think that's also another big, big difference, particularly when I'm doing more serious research, because you and I both know, as you said, 8 out of 10. I think these days it's more like 9 out of 10. You get a decent answer, but it's not 10 out of 10. So you always have to check the answer, right?
Correct.
For sense. And having citations makes it vastly simpler to do that second check that you really need to do if you can use it for anything important. Let me give you 2 other examples that just show you the kind of thing that I really like Perplexity for. I had a question for a podcast prep the other day. Very nerdy. What are the 2-way correlations amongst the categories in the Big 5 personality model? Right? I tried it on Google. It was just a hopeless mess. I gave it to Perplexity. It came out with the exact answer. Done. Perfect. The other is I'm a hobbyist who buys and sells and fixes vintage audio systems, 70s, 80s vintage speakers and amplifiers and stuff. And so I'm constantly having questions about some of this really old and sometimes quite obscure equipment. And I just bought today a big old set of early 90s vintage speakers. I want to know how big they were. And, Google, it says this, it says that. I ask Perplexity, and it just gives me the answer straight out. Exactly what I want, nothing more. Extremely impressive.
Yeah. I was asking, this Indian billionaire, Ratan Tata, died like yesterday. And
yeah,
did you know that Waymo's actually like the car that Waymo runs? It's called Jaguar.
Yep.
And Jaguar is actually owned by Tata. So I was actually asking, how did Tata end up owning Jaguar? And then Perplexity just tells me that Tata acquired Jaguar in 2008 from this company called, basically Ford used to own Jaguar cars and Land Rover, and then Tata bought it for $2 billion. And then it became a subsidiary owned by Tata. And then they did a deal with Google so that Waymo could use these Jaguar cars. And it's pretty cool. Have you tried a Waymo here?
I haven't been to San Francisco in 7 years. One of these days I'll get back out there.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I keep getting emails from my friends and videos through the windows. And it seems like it's really easy to get a Waymo ride now.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm asking all these sort of questions. I'm giving a talk at this particular event, and these are the sort of questions they've asked me. Go check out all the interviews I've already done, and try to tell me what I should say to these questions in a way that I haven't spoken about before. And it's pretty good at that. So good that I'm almost feeling like I can be replaced. And then tell me about the NVIDIA Blackwell chips. It seems like there's a recent surge in demand. How should I think about the stock? Or what is the, this particular group have anything to do with this investor? San Francisco had this whole heat wave thing recently. It only cooled down today. And I was trying to understand why there was that whole heat wave going on there. And it really explained very nicely how a whole heat dome was formed because of a high pressure system. And then it basically blocks all the cool breeze from the bay. So, it's amazing, right? Google built the whole Google Assistant thing so that you can go and try to ask these sort of questions, but they never really delivered on giving that sort of an experience. And then a whole inflection moment happened in AI in end of 2022, where AI models, of course, with ChatGPT's entrance into this thing, AI models began to be able to be capable of good summarization, good formatting, good ability to follow context across multiple questions in a chat thread. And all these abilities could be harnessed into building very new experiences. And search is the biggest software category of all. And so we were okay, why don't we try to use them for search? And that ended up being the company.
Yeah, I mean, and people have always said Google is vulnerable because they don't have that big of a moat, really. And in fact, my second biggest investment mistake was some friends of mine had gotten a commitment to get a big chunk of Google IPO stock. And they asked me if I wanted to come in for a chunk of it. And I said, nah.
You should have done it.
Of course, about 20x, 50x. Yeah. But my thesis was search, no moat. Right? I used to actually write search engines, so I know the technology isn't that deep.
Oh, cool.
And I said, where's the moat? And what I missed was seeing all the searches is the moat, actually, I think that Google has. But they've always been susceptible to a quantum leap in capacity. And I think the AI front ends to search are at least have a significant possibility of taking some serious market share from Google, unless they respond. So far, they've been totally lame. The only one worse is Microsoft. Oddly, at first, their AI chat front end for Bing was okay. I went and tried Copilot today, and it totally sucked. It was amazingly bad. I don't know what the hell they're doing up there in Redmond these days. So you guys have some opportunity if you hustle.
Yeah, so you said the word hustle, right? Hustle is usually associated with a startup, not with a big company. I remember going to Redmond and meeting the Bing folks very early on in our journey. And, I think they had just launched Bing Chat, and they were this is the hardest we've ever worked in the last 10 years. And that's when I knew look, if it's all about this amount of work, then to sustain the hustle over a long period of time, it's easier for a startup to do than a big company to do, because simply you don't have the muscle. 1 or 2 months you could grind, but can you grind for 5 years? That's the question, right? And then the incentives are not there. Like for a big company, shipping a new product doesn't necessarily move the market cap. For a startup, like it's your only product. You keep on improving it, like you keep getting new users, you keep seeing the metrics go up, you figure out monetization models, new business models, everything's exciting, everything's new, everything's growing. And then you feel the adrenaline, and that helps you do the grind for like multiple years instead of like 1 or 2 months. And that's what gives you the product edge and the user experience edge over like a big company.
Absolutely. And I've sat on both sides of that line. I've been a C-level executive at multinational corporations, CEO of publicly traded companies. I've also done 5 startups, and I've also advised 17 startups. So I absolutely get what your take. In fact, it's amazing that big business survives at all. It's only because of its scale economies. Its actual productivity per person is way lower than a startup, and that's real important. That actually is a good pivot to my next question. One of the things is I've been digging in, doing research, or at least finding what people are saying about Perplexity, it may not be true, right? Is that you guys have been pretty smart in leveraging existing things that exist out in the world versus reinventing everything. On the other hand, sounds like you have reinvented a few things. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you've decided what to use from the world versus what to build yourself? Always a key question in a startup.
Yeah. I mean, like the way I think about it is like get users, like that's the number one thing. Anything you delay to get users by trying to reinvent things that already exist is not in service of your mission, not in service of your company's business. And like brand and distribution, you told me, right? Search doesn't have moats. I think there's like one moat, which is like brand and distribution. And of course, technology, the latency, like the scale at which you can operate, the infrastructure, attracting high quality employees, the ad revenue, all that's like part of it. But everything is in service of like distribution. When you're a startup and you're like irrelevant and nobody even knows about you, even if you have a cool demo that you build completely on your own, why should anyone care, right? So we always were pragmatic in that sense. Even though we had a pretty good background on like AI research, we never really like felt like we had to go train our own models, or we had to go build the entire index ourselves. It's all about like showing users the completely new experience. Like, what is the company even building? What is the core product experience? And what is the thesis that this experience is going to be the next generation of way people search? How do you validate that? That is your only job. And after you validate that, and after you get a certain amount of users, and after you figure out a way to like monetize reasonably, then try to start like building stuff on your own and like taking advantage of all the data you're collecting on a daily basis, and try to like see if there's some unique kind of models or unique kind of orchestration, unique kind of like indexing or ranking that you can do to like make your product better. That was the approach we took, and it served us pretty well.
Yeah, this is what I read off the internet, including stuff Perplexity gave me. It sounds like you use various large language models, GPT, Claude, Llama, and Mixtral are ones that I saw mentioned for you guys. Also saw that you used both Bing and Google to be your index engine. Any other outside main pieces that you use? Are those correct, by the way?
Yeah, so we use a bunch of ranking signals from many search providers. We build our own index actually, but we also rely on ranking signals from a bunch of data providers. And then we also rely on third-party data providers for certain web domains that like we don't scrape ourselves, we don't crawl ourselves, which only gives us the high-level summary snippet and the metadata related to the URL, but not the actual contents. And we use a bunch of LLMs, open source ones. We take them and we train them on top to customize it for our product, which basically means making it better at summarization, formatting, conciseness, citations, referencing, contextual, like long context and all those kind of abilities. And the closed source ones, we just take them as is and work a lot on like, a little bit of post-training, custom post-training with our data, but a lot of like prompt engineering. And we build like routers and orchestration across all these sources of data, models, and like APIs for like specific license data, third-party data providers, ranking signals, like everything basically goes into this giant orchestration router and then produces the end result for the user.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I like those kinds of businesses because essentially you're rewarded for the skill at which you combine the pieces and then identifying what pieces you can improve or what little shims you can put in that the market's not providing.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk to me a little bit about how you do this orchestration, because clearly there's some dynamic decisions to be made as you're choosing what sources to use, how to weight them, how to prioritize them, and then how to cook them. Talk a little bit about that engine, the orchestration engine.
Yeah, 100%. So there are a lot of things you do at the retrieval stage itself, which is depending on the user's query, you try to pick like the most relevant top 10 or 20 different links. And then even that has like multiple stages of ranking. First thing is just like based on like, query word matches, which is like traditional retrieval, TF-IDF style retrieval. And then that goes through like n-gram overlap as a second stage. And then that goes through embedding based similarity, which is more semantic and fine grained, that actually takes the contextual meaning of the query and then contextual meaning of the documents, and then picks 10 or 20 different paragraphs across like bunch of links as the most relevant paragraphs to answer the user's query. And then all those paragraphs with the corresponding URL like go into the LLM, and the LLM decides in the context of the user's query, like how to piece together all these different sources and write a concise or detailed, depending on like the intent of the user, an answer that's well formatted, easily readable, and like well referenced to each of those paragraphs retrieved. And then we have collect a lot of data of like, which domains and subdomains are like worthy of citations in terms of like, how much people trust those domains, some notion of page rank essentially. And then that's also used to like influence the ranking. And then the final answer renders like how it renders in the product. And we collect a lot of data in terms of like, user feedback on like answers. We go and debug if the answer was corrupted because the AI model itself made a mistake, but the sources were all fine. Or the AI model was not really at fault, but it was because of the poor sourcing, or like, either incorrect source, or like the index was not really like fresh, but the source was fine. Or there were like 2 or 3 different sources that were saying different pieces of information about the same thing. So the AI model wasn't smart enough to figure out like which is quite right and wrong. So all these long tail issues exist, and we try to really understand like based on a lot of like, user logs and like complaints of people on a daily basis, and then try to go and improve the product at different parts of the stack in a more general way so that we address like thousands of bugs in a day, right? And then you compound this, like each day we learn something new about like, where the product fails. As you said, it's only 9 out of 10. It used to be 7 out of 10, right? 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 99 out of 100 eventually, then 999 out of 1,000. Like the error rate should go down in an exponential way. And then that basically allows us to fix the long tail of issues. The AI is all about, it starts as the 80-20, right? Like you create a completely new, unique experience that wasn't possible before. You achieved a certain sweet spot and S curve of 80-20 that gets users pretty excited about it. But the grind to like go through the long tail of the remaining 20% is what differentiates the great products from the good products. And that's basically our journey today, to climb the last mile.
That makes a hell of a lot of sense. Now, as part of this retrieval process, are you using semantic vector databases to, do embeddings on pieces of content for your RAG?
Yeah, we use a vector database, an open source project called Quadrant. And then we build like some custom versions on top of that. And like, I should say that like vector databases are like misunderstood. Like I said, there are 3 or 4 stages in the ranking process, and the traditional elastic style, like keyword matches and n-gram overlaps, all these things, TF-IDF based ranking, all these things give you like a lot of the heavy lifting already. Like you already get a really good, like high recall set of documents. The precision is lower, but the recall is like pretty good. And then the vector embedding based similarity, vector database based similarity score optimizes the precision even more. And then the LLM finally optimizes the precision the most because it's extremely fine grained in terms of like trying to like, decide which sources to use for like writing the answer. So basically think about this as like search is all about making sure your results have high recall and high precision. Recall basically means the right document is in the set of documents you retrieved, but not necessarily ranked right at the top. Precision means the right document is ranked right at the top. So even if the first 2 or 3 links contain what you want. And for a 10 blue link search engine, you really need to nail precision. Otherwise, the experience is going to be really bad. But for an LLM based like answer engine, the traditional style retrieval can just optimize for recall. Of course, not poor precision, but like reasonably good precision is enough. And the LLM that ingests the final set of like 10 or 20 paragraphs can like weed out the irrelevant ones way better than like training based on user click logs. So that's the major advantage over the legacy system that Google has built.
And also the legacy system that OpenAI runs, right? They're just the LLM, well, with some other stuff on top, but not that much.
Exactly. So they built the AI. They definitely are the pioneers of like making AI very good conversationalists.
One thing I'm going to insert here, this is one of my pet peeves. More and more people are saying AI when they actually mean LLMs or generative AI. And AI is a much bigger field than just deep learning and LLMs. So let's make it clear here that we're not talking about AI in general. We're talking about this particular transformer-based generative AI, which is where all the action is right now, but it may not be where all the action is forever.
Yeah, exactly. So you call them LLMs. LLMs are completely like a fine thing. My feeling is that like, like what you call AI is kind of the purest probably think about AI as like agents that go and like actually like, the game engine's AI that's part of a game, like the AIs that you write for Pac-Man, the Ghosts, when you're like trying to build a new game, or like when you're trying to like build a chess game, like you're writing a software to like, build like a chess simulator, you have to make an AI for the opponent, right? So that's what traditionally computer scientists thought about as AIs. And that's why like a lot of the milestones in AI were all about like, can I train an AI to beat the best human player on chess or like best human player on Go? That used to be the thing, Atari. And then now AI is like sort of like anything that automates some kind of human activity is an AI. Like that's sort of the working definition these days. So in some sense, calling LLMs as AI is not like completely wrong either, because you can argue that LLMs give you a lot of heavy lifting over like, translators, people who take notes in a meeting, people who reformat like a meeting notes into like actionable like items for whoever attended it, like people who do like grammar correction, like speech writers. All these like basic tasks are getting automated with just like a single LLM call. And I think you can say like to some extent that's sort of an AI, but I see what you're trying to say is like, yeah, it's a pet peeve, and totally it's fine to say that.
Yeah, it's just one of my pet peeves. I've been working, advising AI companies for a while, particularly some of the AGI-oriented things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other approaches still have a lot of merit. And LLMs will be part of the solution, I'm convinced, because it solves, as you point out, a huge raft of problems, which even 4 years ago we thought were going to be 10 years out solving them, particularly the language problem. But there are other problems. For instance, there's a reason that LLMs suck at doing math, right? And they're never going to be good at math by themselves, while other kinds of systems will be great at math, working back and forth to use the LLMs to figure out what the math should solve, and then use solver AI to actually solve the math. That's a question for another day, but they are very impressive. I use them all the time for all kinds of stuff. I wrote a program last year that writes movie scripts using LLMs. It has 40 different places where the human touches the script, but the human can touch it for just 30 seconds or a minute. And then the LLMs go off and do their thing. And in about 8 hours of human time, you can write a 90-minute feature movie, which is kind of cool. And could not have done that without LLMs. And it seems like magic, but it's still not the full AGI, the human capable system. But it'll probably be an important part of that system. Oh, I was going to mention one other thing I did with Perplexity, and I think I'm going to actually, this is funny, maybe it's illegal. I don't think it's illegal, but anyway, it might be dangerous. So don't do this at home, children. I've long had this investment idea, a rather complicated one, that's essentially like a little hedge fund. And so I described it as precisely as I could to Perplexity and said, all right, choose the investments to execute this strategy. And it did, and they were very sensible. and I'm going to go ahead and test them. I'm going to put together a little mini hedge fund, put 50 grand in it or something, and test this strategy and see what happens. And if it works, if it doesn't, it's a highly hedged strategy, so it can't go to shit too far one way or the other. But if it works, I'm just going to keep running that query once a month and adjust the weights in the portfolio based on what Perplexity has to say. On the grounds that Perplexity has some big sense of what's happening now, more so than anybody else. And it seems to be perfectly capable of understanding this rather complicated strategy, and to the point of not being afraid. I'm sure if I asked OpenAI, I'd say, I can't give investment advice. I'm not a registered investment advisor. But Perplexity, perfectly willing to put together a model portfolio that correctly implements the strategy.
I mean, look, Perplexity is not your financial advisor, but it's such a great tool to do your financial research. And I encourage everybody to not blindly listen to someone else's advice on what to invest, and go and study all these stocks. Earlier, you would go and pay a market analyst to do this for you. Now it's just one Perplexity query away to actually understand should I go and invest in NVIDIA? I don't quite get it. Has everything been priced in already? What about the Blackwell chip delays? How is the demand for training GPUs? Who's NVIDIA's competitor right now? Does it still have no competitors? What's the market 5 years from now? How does this impact Amazon Web Services revenue? How do the margins of NVIDIA ever get squeezed? Who's going to likely do it? All these kind of things are how I try to understand things that I don't have exposure to, or I don't have access to an expert on that topic. And it's pretty amazing, the amount of knowledge you can gather in a few queries of Perplexity. It's pretty incredible. And that's why the product has been built, so that anybody can ask any question without any fear of getting judged. I feel it's a pretty incredible superpower now.
Yeah, let me give you one thing that maybe you can improve on, because I use it all the time to provide useful summaries of things that I need for my thinking about something else, right? That's a piece part. If thinking is chunking, being able to get these pre-processed chunks quicker and better is really huge, as opposed to reading a 500-page book. So for instance, the other day in an online argument, I needed to have a better understanding than I did of Hegel's dialectic. It's a philosophical thing from the German Romantic era in the 19th century. And so today I reran the query, and Perplexity did a pretty good job. ChatGPT 4.0 did a considerably better job. Bing Copilot totally sucked. And I used the identical query. Where ChatGPT was better was it gave quite a bit more detail, even though the prompt was provide a detailed explanation of Hegel's dialectic. It might well be good for y'all to have some form of slider or a second method to get more detail when someone, I know you have to take a shot at what they mean when they say detailed. But in my case, at least, ChatGPT was closer in reading what detailed meant to me. Do you have any thoughts about that?
You mean Perplexity answers giving more detail at certain things?
Yeah, being able to get more detail out of Perplexity than you can. Here was the prompt I used. Provide a detailed explanation of Hegel's dialectic. And OpenAI gave about twice the amount of density of information as Perplexity.
Did you do this query on your mobile app or on the web?
On the web.
Okay, yeah. So I think I just tried your thing again. For me, it seems pretty detailed. I guess the difference could have been any particular A/B test we might be doing on trying to see if some people prefer a concise answer or detailed answer. But clearly, if your prompt contained detail, there's no reason to not provide it for you. Sometimes we do bias towards not outputting too much of text in the mobile apps, because people have limited screen space and limited attention span. So we try to optimize.
Yeah, no, I hardly ever use mobile apps. I hate mobile apps.
Interesting.
The app was the empire striking back against the real internet. And so of course I have to use them when I'm traveling, and they're handy for certain things like Uber. You can't live without your Uber, but I would never, I shouldn't say never. When I'm sitting there reading a book, sometimes I'll use Perplexity on my phone, but 90% of the time I'll use it on the web. Do you guys have an API? If you had an API, I'd start building it in some of my little PC tools. That would be real cool.
Yeah, we do have an API, yeah.
I'll have to check that out. One of the questions we kind of passed on previously, I'd love to get your perspective on how you're going to address that, was that the moats for search seem relatively low. And I mentioned the one I missed when I didn't invest in Google at the IPO, God damn it, was that having seen all the queries, they see now at 85% of the queries, that itself is a sustainable competitive advantage. Not a huge one, but it's not zero either. What kind of moat do you see Perplexity being able to develop over time?
I think like just the ability to like handle so many different types of queries, so many different custom UIs per query, and learning how to monetize a good chunk of them and maintaining the user experience even at the scale of usage we potentially are going to like scale to is going to be very, very hard and challenging. So the infrastructure needed for that, kind of considerations you need to have for correctness and speed and like readability, orchestrating so many different tools, data sources, like this is just going to be pretty difficult. Like I can totally see hundreds of things or thousands of things that can go wrong, and just handling the dynamic space of like AI models constantly being changing, like capabilities and accuracy, latency, it's going to be pretty challenging. So I feel like if we surpass the challenge, that in itself would be our mode. The distribution that we accumulate as a result would be pretty tremendous.
And you will have some first mover advantage if you break through to being the thing that everybody thinks of when they want a better search than Google. Then you will have mind share and room on people's app pages. Goddamn apps, hate apps. But that indeed does become a moat, basically essentially a channel moat where there's a constriction on the channel. People can only think about so many search engines. And if you're in the top 3 of mind share, then you've got something pretty significant.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned something else in passing, which I did want to drill into, which is monetization. Did I actually see ads on one of my accounts recently? Are you guys testing ads or running ads?
We're not running ads yet, but we intend to run ads.
I figured some of the citations are packaged up to look kind of like ads. And I wanted to give another one of my famous Ruddian opinions. I hate fucking advertising. I think it's the ruination of the internet. And around 2002, when Moore's Law made networking and computation inexpensive enough that you could actually fund a pretty good sized site with ads alone, that was the ruination of the internet right there. And I know you guys need a monetization model, but I do ask you very sincerely, always offer a paid tier with no ads, because
Sure.
nothing I hate worse than ads.
Yeah, 100%.
If the free product, you got to monetize it somehow, but you should give people the opportunity to preserve their cognitive sovereignty. I gave a talk on this recently at Zoo Village, Georgia, Republic of Georgia, on one of the most important things, particularly for people who think of themselves as creative thinkers, is to keep your cognitive sovereignty so others don't hijack your brain. And everything about our world today wants to hijack your brain, and hijacking your brain in almost pure form is what advertising is.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you think is going to be in your mix for monetization?
Enterprise, like allowing you to search over your company's files and data, not just like exclusively there, like a mix of both the internal and external data. I think that's never been done before, because the kind of systems, the kind of like 10 blue link search engine you build for the web and build for internal are like completely like pretty different. And so people could never like build both in one place. But LLMs allow you to sort of unify that in a pretty neat way, because most of the heavy lifting is done by LLMs. So I think like we can build a sort of the next generation knowledge work platform for research. And like, that has a huge market, like, several 100 million people are working on a daily basis in so many different parts of the world. And if they all become daily active users of such a product, like I think the TAM is pretty tremendous there. So that is a clean monetization opportunity for us. And we're also going to like do more of the API stuff, like allowing people to build like Perplexity like things for specific verticals, or like things that they really care about. Like, are there like some domains on the internet that you really want the results from, where you put in the effort to like, pick that and then rely on Perplexity's RAG capabilities to just stitch together a cool chat experience. And then we want to be part of like many hardware devices. So we're going to like, if there are people who are building new hardware devices, we would support them through our software to make like, really good voice-to-voice capabilities on them. So these are the current plans, and like, we are pretty nimble and flexible to like keep experimenting here.
How much do you think pro version, premium price pay. Because again, one of my pet peeves, I know the horse has long since left the barn, but if people are willing to pay small amounts for money for real things, not to be attacked by ads, the world would be better off. Unfortunately, psychologically, people prefer free. Are you seeing much take up on your pro product?
Yeah, 100%. Like more than several hundreds of thousands of users are paying for it today.
Oh, that's good. I hope that increases because I think it sends a different incentive to the company than an advertising-based model where you end up like Facebook, who ended up being totally corrupted because the only metric for them is how many times can they keep your eyeballs glued to the screen, when in reality, something like Perplexity, its biggest advantage is to get me on and off 4 times faster than Google because I don't have to repeat the search. I don't have to filter through a bunch of search spam crapola that turned up in the search, etc. And so in some sense, advertising is potentially a corrupting attractor for a company like Perplexity. So keep that in mind as you guys are going forward.
100%, 100%.
Talk about a little bit on what you need to succeed. Now, this may not be up to date, but this is what Perplexity said, is that your most recent funding round was in April, and you had a valuation of about $1 billion. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you raised $62 million, something like that. That doesn't seem to be enough to fight Google.
No, we raised other funding rounds before that too. Like we raised like a Series B before that of 70 million. And then before that, we raised another 20 million. And before that, we raised a seed round of 1 or 2 million. So we have raised more rounds than that. So certainly we have a good amount of money. And I agree, like it's all like drop in the ocean for Google. Google has $100 billion in liquid cash lying in their bank, and like they're generating more profits every year. So we will keep raising capital at least 1 or 2 more financing rounds before going public. And I think it's all about making sure that, a company is healthy, there's a lot of usage, there's a good amount of revenue traction, and making sure that whatever amount we raise, we know exactly what to do with it in terms of translating it to like the right kind of growth and metrics. So that's what we're really focused on right now.
Good. Sounds good. When I looked at your list of investors, it was quite surprising in that it was dominated mostly by individuals rather than institutions. I always considered entrepreneurial finance to be one of my sweet spots, and I've always been very interested in that field. I learned about it from Bill Salmon, who's was a long time the lead professor of entrepreneurial finance at the Harvard Business School, and by mere luck, I got him on the board of my first company. So he gave me a private tutorial on entrepreneurial finance. How did you come to select having your lead investor and some of your other major investors be individuals rather than institutions?
I mean, our rounds were always led by institutions, like the lead investor in the sense, the one who sets the price and anchors the round has always been institutional. Like Series A was done by NEA, Series B was done by IVP, and Series C was anchored by that was slightly different, Daniel Gross, but he's sort of like an institutional investor, the amount of capital he allocates. So it's not been like completely individuals. But individuals have been a big part of our funding rounds too, along with institutions. Like NVIDIA is an investor, they're an institution. Bezos is an investor, he's an individual. But again, Bezos has so much money that
you might as well be an institution, right?
Exactly, right? So it's all about what value they add to our company, their reputation, and the kind of introductions they can make for us and strategic advice they can provide for us. And the collaborations.
Now, IVP, is that Insight Venture Partners, or that's some other IVP?
Institutional Venture Partners.
Okay, I don't know them. Normally Insight does a little bit later rounds. Your next round, they're a really good company. NEA, of course, also a very nice company.
Sure.
I'm going to give you my one complaint about Perplexity.
Sure.
It's so annoying that it's unbelievable, and it's no doubt easy to fix. At least once every other day, when I go to one of my Perplexity windows, and I have them up all over the place on my browser, I carefully type in a prompt, hit return, and nothing happens, but it eats the prompt. This must have happened to me 25 times over the last 2 months. There is something wrong with something going on there. That should not be the user experience. It happened yesterday, and so I know it's still current. OpenAI, on the other hand, occasionally will get screwed up and say you have to log in again, but it'll never have you enter a prompt and then eat it and do nothing. Perplexity does that not often, but regularly. I would send that note with a bullet to your team and say, fix that, God damn it, because it is truly annoying.
Okay, I'll take a look.
And it's on the web version. I've only seen it on the web.
Okay.
But it happens regularly and happened as recently as yesterday. I tried to use your image generator. It just seemed to be total garbage. I must not have understood it. So don't take that one to the bank yet. But if I spend enough time figure out how to use it and it's still not pleasant, I'll send you my thoughts about that. There's rumors running around that NVIDIA is going to buy you guys. You care to comment on that?
I didn't see this rumor anywhere. Where do you see it?
Type into Perplexity. Who's talking about NVIDIA buying Perplexity?
Okay.
You'll probably get some. I've seen it floating around on Twitter.
Okay. No. I can confirm that it's not real. And, they're investors in us. Jensen Lau's using Perplexity. And, I think a lot of NVIDIA employees are daily active users of Perplexity. And we collaborate a lot on framework software like TensorRT, LLM inference. We use their Nemotron framework for training, but there's no actual acquisition talks.
And truthfully, putting on my strategist hat, it would be a stupid idea for NVIDIA because in general, you do not want to get in the business of competing with your customers.
Right. NVIDIA is an infrastructure and platform company.
It's always tempting to sneak into one of the markets, but it's a bad strategic idea. And I think those guys are smart enough that they probably aren't going to do anything as stupid as that. So finally, what do you see for the next year or two for Perplexity? What's on your plate of things that you need to do over the next 2 years?
Keep growing, keep the product amazing, keep it fast, keep it accurate, expand the use cases beyond just simple Q&A and fact checks and knowledge related researches, but expand to a lot of different verticals, allow people to do a lot of their day-to-day activities here, even transact natively on Perplexity and make the product even more personalized to people, almost like it should be their second brain. So if we do all these basic stuff, if we get it right and translate that to good business enterprise value, then we'll be very successful. And that's the only thing I'm laser focused on.
That sounds sensible at your stage. Eventually you'll have to play a higher level strategy game, but if you just execute the best for the next 2 years, that's probably all you really need to do. I will tell you on the edge of what the thing is useful for, just for giggles, I tried it out on a coding problem. Even though it's not what it's designed for, I use either Claude or the new O1 preview of GPT is amazing for coding.
Yeah.
And I tried out Perplexity. It didn't do a terrible job, surprisingly. I know it's not designed for that, but it probably wouldn't take too much work to get it to be a decent coding assistant.
Yeah. Look, a lot of people do use Perplexity for writing code, and I think the pro search is pretty good at scouring pages of documentation on the web and trying to give you a code that takes into account the latest developer libraries and updates and stuff, whereas the models on their own are not up to date. And some people prefer that for debugging a specific issue related to a specific library or figuring out exactly how to chain two dependencies. I think these are the kind of things that people come to Perplexity for their coding related questions. I feel the coding market is really bifurcated, right? A lot of people like their AIs natively on their editor, VS Code, GitHub Copilot. Some people go to ChatGPT because it's a muscle memory now, because that was the first big use case ChatGPT nailed and it has the first mover advantage. Some people like the Claude because you can build an artifact out of the code you generate and visualize the code in terms of an actual front end for it. And some people like Perplexity because it has access to documentation and libraries, and some people prefer that. So I feel there's no one winner takes it all here in coding. People are going to go to different tools depending on what suits their current use case at that moment.
Well, very good. I want to thank Aravind for an extremely interesting conversation. And despite my little quibbles about this or that, all my listeners out there, use Perplexity. It is great. You will not regret it. If you do, you can get your money back from me, right? I really just think Perplexity is the most amazing product jump in capacity of any category I've seen in the last year. And I know you guys existed before that, but I only started using it maybe 6 or 8 months ago. I just think it's amazing. You guys are doing a wonderful job. Get rid of that prompt eating problem and you'll have an A+ product, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much.
Great. Bye-bye. Audio production and editing by Andrew Blevins Productions. Music by Tom Muller at modernspacemusic.com.